All right, I'm working on a Bobcat, and what's happening is there's an electric fuel pump that sits kind of underneath the frame area, and when this thing starts, when the key's in the on position, the fuel pump is supposed to start pumping, right? I think it's a low pressure system, so it's probably like 5 psi somewhere in there, but the whole design on the system is that the tank is pretty low, and the engine sits, a lot more forward from the tank, and so there's this little pump that helps the fuel flow from the tank to the engine, and it's a Kubota engine. This is a Kubota fuel pump that you can get on any Kubota site that sells parts. You can also get these. This particular pump is the original one. This is the OEM pump. It's a Japanese pump, so it's obviously made to last. You can get this same exact pump, the Chinese version of it, made in China. It's probably okay. It's probably going to work fine for a couple years, but what I would recommend is that you get the OEM pump on this, because this machine is about 20 years old. It's got the original Japanese pump that was in there, and the pump just started to fail in the last 6 months or a year. So, you can spend $200 on the right Japanese pump that's supposed to be in there, and it'll probably last you 20 years. Or you could spend, I want to say they're about $50 for the Chinese version of this, and it will probably work from a pressure perspective, but it may only last you a year or two. So it's totally up to you. I'm not trying to sell you on what pump to buy or how much to spend. When I do something like this, I always try to get the OEM pump, and I try to do things so I'm not doing it twice, and that's kind of the way I approach it. But the way the pump actually sits, this is a B100. It's a loader backhoe, and they made these about 20 years ago. And where the pump is sitting is underneath the machine. So if you come underneath it, it's underneath it in the frame area. So if you go behind this area in the frame, you'll see the pump. It's up against the frame, and it's just 2 bolts, and then there's an inlet and an outlet. What happens on it is it'll seize up. When you go to turn the key on, it's supposed to start pumping, and it won't start. It's seized, and it's not permanently seized, but it's just stuck. So if you were to tap on it with a screwdriver, it would possibly become unstuck, and it would start pumping, and then maybe it would stop when you're using the machine, and the pressure could be a lot lower than it should be. So it's supposed to be around 5, and maybe it's only about 3, right? So your machine may work, it may start, it may not start, and it could be intermittent is the problem with the fuel. And if you have that kind of symptom, I would say, the Kubota diesel powered Bobcats for sure have these Kubota pumps in them. And again, they're Japanese pumps used by Kubota. So that's kind of how that works, right? So today I'm going to go ahead and change out the pump, and I'm going to see if that helps. What you can do when you actually put the machine in run, you should hear the pump pumping, and that's the first thing you'll hear. So if I click the key over, not to start, but just to run, I don't know if you can hear that, but it sounds like someone tapping. So the inside of that pump is obviously got a flat spot or a rusted spot or a bad spot on the pump itself, and it sounds like someone's tapping and knocking when the pump is on. And with this machine, sometimes it would not start when you put the key on the pump itself, and the machine will start up for about 5 seconds, and then it gets really lopey and then runs out of fuel, and you can't start it. And that's the whole symptom. So if it runs really lopey at idle and then stalls and you can't start it when it's cold, check the fuel pump on it to see if it's working, and that's a good place to start. Okay, I've got the pump disconnected, but I wanted to show a way. When I usually do any work on a pump that's in line like this, you can kind of do yourself a favor and get a couple small vice grips. And what you can do is you can vice grip off the lines on either side of the pump. So you don't want to kill these. You just put them on there, kind of like a little tight, just tight enough to hold the actual vice grip to the hose, and then collapse the hose enough to stop the flow of any fuel in that line. So I've got one on the supply, and I've got one on, I'm going to call it the return, but it's really just the inlet and the outlet right on the fuel line. There's one here as well. So Got those clamped off. I've got the 2 bolts out of the frame, and there's a plug that connects this to the power source. When the machine is powered on, the key's powered on, there's a little red connector in there. That is just gonna pop right out. You see that there, it goes into that red connector. That's your power source in when the key is on, and then there's a ground connector that's gonna go back on that bolt when you put that bolt back on. But the fuel pump is away from the frame, both bolts are out. I've got it clamped off on either side, and now I'm gonna just back off the clamps, the hose clamps on the fuel line. And then once I do that, there'll be some fuel that comes out, and you're underneath the machine, so obviously you don't wanna be right underneath this when you pull these clamps, because you're gonna get some fuel obviously dripping out onto the floor. So put a rag down so you can catch the fuel, and then you're gonna put the new pump right on. And when you put the new pump on, pay attention to the direction, the flow direction. So this is the inlet and this is the outlet, right? So fuel comes in and is pumped out over here, right? So you gotta pay attention to that, because if you put this on backwards, you're gonna have no start, obviously, because you're pumping fuel out of the engine versus into the engine. So just be aware of that. Okay, I got the pump all back together again. It was relatively straightforward on this. Couple tips I can offer is when you go to install the new pump, what you want to make sure you do is clean up the mounting surface really well. Take some sandpaper and just kind of scuff up the bracket that holds the pump, and that way when you bolt this on, the ground is really good. Couple things that could fail if you have a bad ground. Obviously, it's not gonna work to the full strength, right? So you want to have a good ground, and then when you go to connect that positive wire, it should be a tight fit, and you want to get 2 hands on it and put it together all the way so it clicks. It should click into place. It'll lock into place, and you'll know when it's in all the way. Get that in really good. When I pulled the old one out, it almost felt like it was just too loose, right? So you want that to be tight and you want it to click in. Get that sanded down really good. Not really good, but scuff it up at least, clean it up, and then make sure that you have a good ground contact from the pump to the bracket that you're grounded to, right? And also the third tip I can offer is change out the fuel filter. There is a inline fuel filter that sits in front of the pump, before the pump. So you want to make sure that is there first, and then second, you want to change it if you can, get the right filter for it, and that'll keep any sediment out of this pump. You don't want to get anything in this pump. That's kind of the real key to keeping it last, a long time without any problems. And that's pretty much it. It's about an hour to do this from start to finish, and that's taking everything down or tearing it down and taking your time and putting it all together. Get your hose clamps on there, get them on kind of straight and facing out if you can, because even though it's not going to leak now, you may have to get in there later to do something. So make sure the clamps, the actual bolt part is facing out, so you can easily disconnect this if you had to without taking this off the frame and the mounting bracket. And that's pretty much it. It'll be a lot quieter. I turned the key on and it's pretty smooth. It still has a little bit of a pump sound to it, but not nearly as loud as the old one. So everything went really smooth, and this is really kind of what it should look like when you're all done. You can zip tie things up. I tend to zip tie things out of the way and keep everything kind of neat and where it's supposed to be. And that way you don't get caught up on branches and whatnot from the bottom. If that line was to hang down below the frame, it would be bad, because you're gonna get caught on a branch and you could pull the line right out of the machine. So try to keep the fuel lines tucked in with zip ties and keep them off the ground area.